Morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. So we're going to talk about something non-technical and, not all that much fun, actually, about cybersecurity and its relationship to, PTSD and its relationship to the cybersecurity environment or ecosystem. So why give a talk like this? Well, the reason is, a few months ago, I got angry. There was an article that was posted talking about cybersecurity PTSD. And I give the publication credit. After getting a lot of flack for publishing this, they walked it back pretty damn quickly. But in the meantime, I had a few beverages and realized that the Black Hat CFP was still open, and it's like, nope, I'm rage submitting a CFP for this, and we'll see if this happens. And then shockingly enough, a few months later, it's like, yes, we would like to have your talk. So here I am. But what really bothered me about this is that unintentionally, I don't think there was any malice on the part of the authors in this question, that it was trivializing and infantilizing a fairly serious issue. Because when we talk about PTSD, we're talking about a number of debilitating conditions in many cases that can stem from a wide variety of sources. And, classically we look at this as being three primary symptoms or expressions: hypervigilance, hyperarousal, re-experiencing, and most importantly, at least for me, would be avoidance, as being those classic sort of indicators and how this expresses itself in individuals. And if we look at how this condition comes about, there's a variety of sources. So my personal background, as we'll hear about in a few minutes, is from the military. But certainly as we've become slightly more inclusive in the security environment, I'd say we still have a far, long way to go. There's plenty of people who suffer from this condition, from PTSD, as a result of sexual trauma. Really, the causes of this could be any sort of event that leads to endangerment or threatens one's life, or even the observation of others and certain risks. And all of these factors come together to create not a one-size-fits-all area, which leads to the use of a Futurama meme, which is always appropriate because we want to try and keep this at least as light as possible. That, really at the end of the day, it's hard to shoehorn a definition and an experience of what does this mean and how do we go about this? Because at the end of the day, all generalizations are stupid. You can unpack that one later. So instead of trying to bullshit my way through some universal definition so that everyone could walk away with definitive knowledge on how to respond to this, what the idea of PTSD means, how to interact with those who are working with this condition within the security environment, instead, I'm just going to tell a story, because really at the end of the day, the only thing authoritative that I can speak on is me. It's not the best of stories, but it's a story nonetheless. So my story starts, I was a philosophy graduate. I was at graduate school at the University of Chicago and realized that was not going to be a very smart move long term. So I quit that, ended up working construction for a little bit, and then I decided, I need to do something a little more smart, so I ended up working computers, did data analytics for an industrial supply company, realized that was very boring. So I decided, why not join the Navy? That sounds like an excellent idea, right? And the reason I did that is because I wanted to ride submarines. But the problem is that when I got to Fort Meade, which is my very first duty station, you can make connections from there. They saw my background like, oh, you know computers. You're going to sit in a cubicle again and do computer stuff. So as a result of that, at the time it seemed like a really great idea. I sort of weaseled my way into a very interesting deployment to Afghanistan in the winter of 2011-2012. Got to do some fun things in central Afghanistan and whatnot. Take fun pictures of me on the mountains. That's an interesting uniform. Anyway, the problem was that didn't really hit me at the time because I was very much high speed, low drag in terms of career. Very focusing on here are the wickets I need to hit and I want to be awesome. And it wasn't until about a month and a half after I got back, actually, this would be April of 2012, I had a stroke. That gives one a lot of time to actually think about something when you're laid up in the hospital trying to remember how to walk again. And it turned out that the reason for said stroke, or at least as best as anyone from Navy medicine could determine, was an undiagnosed heart defect, which was very interesting because I was doing rather well up until that point and no reason to worry. So one very interesting surgery that had some anesthesia problems later, not only did I have plenty of time to think about what I'd been doing in my job and some things that I didn't particularly enjoy and realize exactly what the implications were, but I'd also sat through a terrifying experience in terms of just what happened between the stroke itself and then a very unfortunate surgical event at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Well, now Walter Reed, Bethesda, etc. It doesn't matter. part of this, and this is sort of a dovetail, this is a separate conversation, there's a concept called moral injury, which I'm a big fan of, that plays into the overall PTSD narrative. The idea of, being significantly harmed just at a fundamental ethical level of what have I done, what have been the meanings of my actions. This certainly filled into things, but really just added a sort of coda to a lot of quite frankly, it's very interesting being on an operating table and being, awake and aware of what's going on the whole time as something's being done to you. However, because I'm an interesting sort of person, I must preserve my military career, which is why I went through that surgery, which is why I kept my damn mouth shut, and then I took orders to go to the USS Wayne Meyer, DDG 108, in the spring of that year. Problem is that, I knew what my job was and had a really good, I was effective, I was awesome. I got to the ship and I was a fish out of water, which is an interesting position to be in on a ship. And, I just had to relearn a job, and I no longer felt like I was in a place where I was effective, and I felt that I wasn't contributing anywhere. This was on top of a lot of family strain that I had. There were a lot of problems. And sort of during this time, I acquired a Glock 19. And June of 2013, I decided to try and suck start that Glock, which is not something that is very smart to do, especially when the little guy on the right or left, depending on how you're looking, was sleeping in the bedroom next door, and then my daughter, who's now 9, walks in as daddy's got a gun to his head. So as a result of that, my wife left me. Then, family was gone. Had a lot of things to ponder there. I sucked at my job, so I didn't even have that to rely on. My sea duty status got revoked. So not only did I suck at my job, I couldn't even do it anymore. I was on ice just sitting in an office or whatever and doing medical stuff. So everything I valued was at that point gone. Spent some fun time at the One North Inpatient Mental Health Center at Balboa Medical Center in San Diego. The view is nice when you actually can get a window, but it's not a very fun facility. But part of this, though, in being put on ice, so to speak, is that I got some time to actually start thinking about what the hell was going on and, start proceeding with recovery. And the thing is that when I looked at what it was that I actually valued for what I was doing and what gave me some sort of agency, it wasn't the, running around the mountains of Afghanistan or supporting people doing the same. It was really working within that computer space because, one, I felt like I was actually kind of good at it. It was kind of fun. And when I wasn't doing stuff that made me feel a little morally questionable, I felt like I was doing good. So after I got the most, not embarrassing, but certainly unfortunate letter in my life, it's always disheartening to say that you are unfit for something, in this case being military service. I ended up working at Los Alamos National Laboratory when I got out because I still wanted to fight the good fight. I thought protecting a nuclear weapons laboratory and working on the incident response team and then leading it would be something that would be great, and it tied into that sense of agency. And it was a good job to be in. Unfortunately for Los Alamos, fortunately for Dragos, then I moved on to Safeguard Civilization in the industrial control space about a year ago. So what did we learn here? I gave you a little background for who I am, what I'm talking about, but what's the point? The point is that one of the things that put me in a really bad spot and that really started grinding things along, there was certainly the moral qualms and questioning of I felt that I did really terrible, almost evil things, but also it was the lack of being able to feel as though I was actually doing something that mattered and something that gave me agency. So I would say if there was a tipping point that really sort of pushed me over the edge, and this may sound somewhat trivial in light of some of the things that I've just talked about, moving from that work environment where I felt like I was actively doing something and doing well into some place where I really didn't have a place, really took things out of me. So having a combination of confidence just in what you're doing and agency that I'm enabled to do it really helped lead me on the road to recovery. Still having problems. You might notice that I don't go to too many parties and avoid some of the things that are going on in Las Vegas. But, overall, I'd say I'm in a much better place. I don't own any firearms anymore either, and I never will again. But why security? I already talked about this a little bit. Certainly there's a personal side of the story that really fits in just in terms of individual preference. But in my estimation, working in the security space really provides a way of establishing that sense of self-worth. There's the classic sense where you should be confident in yourself or whatever, and, all these other sorts of things. But it really helps that when you prove your ability to others by doing something fairly concrete that you could express on a stage at Black Hat or in front of your coworkers, or your family to tell them that's like, hey, this is what I do. I read other people's email, but that's so I can prevent them from enabling macros on the documents that are attached to them. But really it's trying to find, where do you fit in within the overall society? What is it that I'm contributing to this? How am I improving things? And I think that's a really important thing that for me, or it has been for me, and within this space overall. So, if this could be distilled into a very simple soundbite, information security is quite frankly empowering. I can't speak for those who have suffered from things like sexual trauma or from other experiences, but I have to imagine in looking at some of my brothers and sisters in this space that they at least feel somewhat the same way. That being in this role is a unique one because it really allows you to do something, to play defense, to help others in a non-trivial fashion, which can be a very potent feeling when you've had that complete loss of agency and sense of being able to protect and defend oneself. So in looking for this, it may sound terrible that you need a sense of, validation, but it's important. Knowing that others value and think that what you're doing is significant is key. And that allows you to see that you have an ability to contribute to the environment and then satisfy organizational needs to give yourself a, placement or, location within an overall society, workplace, etc., but also fulfilling personal goals that it's like, yes, I'm doing something that gives me a sense of self-worth. In talking about this, and one of the things that bothered me with the original article and then the sort of pseudo-classic misconceptions around post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome, etc., is, there's a lot of misconceptions around this, whether it's the crazy vet or, all sorts of other ideas. And if there's something, in addition to giving some background for what this actually looks like, what I'd like to at least share is like, hey, here are some things that maybe if, you're worried, concerned, or that someone that you're interacting with might be experiencing these sorts of things, well, what should you kind of do? I don't have definitive answers, but I have a few suggestions at least. So first, there's the common idea like, hey, she or he needs to disengage. You need to take a break. This might be the case in some situations. I can understand that, but I know in my case, it was almost a bad thing when I was disengaged from operations, at least operations that I felt confident in and that I felt were contributing to good things. Trying to keep people involved is key because, the other part or corollary to this is like, I need to give him or her some space. That's almost one of the worst things you can do because one of the most pernicious and nasty symptoms and expressions of post-traumatic stress is that sense of avoidance, that I have no place. No one wants to talk to me because I'm such a bad person, or no one would want to talk to me because I was powerless, unable to help myself in some situation. It's a touchy subject because there's a delicate balance point between engaging and being overbearing, but just simply saying that like, nope, I need to leave he or she alone, it's probably not a good idea. Lastly, the don't work so hard. This is maybe a very personal one for me. I know my boss, to his great credit, tells me to take a break all the time. He bought me some Legos and a case of beer and told me to take a week off once upon a time, so good for him. But at the same time, if work is where you're perceiving some sort of value, it might not be a sustainable path forward, but be mindful that for someone especially who is just recovering or in the stages of, moving away from a traumatic and truly debilitating experience, because again, one of the central ideas behind a traumatic event is that sense of helplessness, powerlessness as forces external to you, whether that be a, improvised explosive device to a, rape of any sort, is that, again, that sense that I wasn't able to protect myself. So being in a situation where, like, well, no, like, this is something I can do, this is something that brings value, and I know I'm good at this, can be a very good thing. The problem, again, is finding that sense of balance between making sure you don't burn someone out and, at the same time, making sure that they have some means of effectively engaging and expressing that agency. Ultimately, pity serves no one. One of the reasons why I don't talk about this, and now I'm talking about it in front of a bunch of people at Black Hat, is I don't want people saying, oh, poor Joe. What has he been, I feel so sorry for him. Like, I don't want you to feel sorry for me. Shit happens. Excuse my language. The main thing is like, I want to move forward with this, and I'd like to think that's the same for most other people. And really, when we look at the security environment, there's a lot of things that we could actually sort of bring to this. This is one of the things that came out in my treatment was that, there's some almost good things to be said for being hypervigilant, for, having that attention to detail to your environment. So if we can really find a way to identify and manage symptoms, security is really kind of an interesting space for people who are dealing with this condition, not only for the sense of agency brought in, but, if you want someone to be paranoid, I don't want to be on that wall, you need me on that wall, then this is almost sort of a good place to be in. I'm not saying this is something to take advantage of, like I've seen interesting talks about how like autistic people can be taken advantage of to work in computer science or whatever. That's ridiculous sort of talk. But in looking at individuals who, again, from a cognitive and psychological diversity sample, I would say that, we can bring something a little more interesting to the table. Ultimately, the main thing we want to look for is don't ignore but empower. So what do? Well, I don't have any blanket recommendations because, as I said earlier, all generalizations are stupid and not everyone's situation is going to be the same. So really, there's no standard playbook. There's not going to be some single computer-based training that your HR department can blast out that everyone has to take once a year for 20 minutes to click through a bunch of slides. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, especially between, say, a veteran, a sexual assault victim, medical trauma victim, etc. But really the thing is, and coming from, for those familiar with the company I work for now, Dragos, we're big on nuance and not making blanket statements. The same sort of thing applies here. Nuance is key. Really understanding that there are individuals in question. And if there's one thing I can say, and this really applies to the information security in general, just be excellent to each other. As a community as a whole, I think we've gotten better recognition that we need to be nicer to each other. And this is one of those cases where that's very important. That really look out for your fellow brothers, sisters, others in this environment. Help them out, reach out. Don't blast people on Twitter when you think they said something stupid, but really look after one another. So what have we talked about? Well, we've talked about the symptoms and consequences are very real. There's no hiding that. But, a lot of this results in people who might actually fit in very well in this environment. So the main thing is that don't ignore, don't pity, don't infantilize this, but engage, just like you would with anyone else that you work with. And, infantilizing just leads to resentment. Pisses me off, I'm sure it pisses others off, and that's probably not a good thing in the long term. So this is me in November, and I have a third child now. That's Matthew. Or that's not Matthew, that's Lucas. I hope my wife doesn't watch this now. He's 2 now, so life is getting better. What can I say? And to close, I would just like to thank some people. So Dr. Shara Max at Naval Medical Center San Diego and Jefferson Edmonds at Fleet and Family Support Services in San Diego for saving my life, essentially. Without them, I wouldn't be here today. I'm pretty damn confident about that. Robin Spears at the Veterans Administration in New Mexico, where I still live, who is helping me continue to do well. So she's been an invaluable support. And while there's many people in various walks of life that helped me immediately, I'd also like to thank the crew of the USS Wayne Meyer for, at least looking at me and not trying to cover something up, but kicking my ass off the ship and making sure that I got better. So that's all I've got. I think we have a little time for questions, but certainly we can go to the breakout room or the wrap-up room if anyone would like to discuss further. Again, not the most pleasant of topics, especially first thing in the morning on day 2 of Black Hat, but if nothing else, I just hope that everyone could walk away with at least a little bit more understanding of what this looks like so that we don't make blanket statements or certainly not uninformed statements about some very serious things and just have a greater appreciation for the people that work in this environment. So that's all I've got.